I think that is working. Okay. So welcome everyone. So this is module 4 for the Fusion course. So we're going to be looking at slightly more intermediate and advanced modelling tonight. So we've obviously looked at the basic stuff in the first 2 sessions where we were looking at sort of sketching and extruding and revolving, probably quite familiar to most of you. I don't know if this will be familiar or not, we'll find out I suppose. We're going to be looking at things like sweeping, lofting and surface modelling. And once you've got, leaving the surface modelling aside, once you've got sort of the 4 classic ways of modelling, so extruding, revolving, sweeping and lofting, you can pretty much, with a combination of those, make any shape you like. There are exceptions, there are really complex shapes which might be difficult to make, but those 4 elements, so those 4 modelling functions, if you like, you can make pretty much any shape you want. You can break it down enough into small bits, whatever you want to model. So, extruding, revolving done, we're going to look at sweeps and lofts. Anyone not used a sweep before? Wonderful, so we've got some newbies when it comes to sweeps. Anyone not used lofts before? Great, but some of you have some familiarity with this whole process. So
familiarity rather than regular use.
Cool, okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm going to go for an example. Obviously, we'll go through elements of lofting. Lofting in particular is really good to get your head around if you haven't used it much, simply because it's such a powerful way of making quite complex shapes quite quickly. And there's more to know about it than things like, obviously, extruding and revolving, which are relatively straightforward. But before we do that, we're going to look at sweeping, which is pretty simple. So if we look at the first example I sent you, which is the M4 decorative sweep example, this kind of cornice-like looking thing, and we'll have a look at that. So sweeping is just like extruding, really. You're taking a profile, and instead of extruding perpendicular from that profile, you're sweeping along some kind of designated line or a path. So that extrude can have a curve or a shape to it, which is more than just a straight line. And that's all it really is. Only occasionally useful, but occasionally very useful to do whatever shape you're trying to model. So let's have a look at this example. I'm just going to turn on the 2 sketches that drive this model. And I'm going to turn off the model itself. Right there. So you can see the 2 sketches, hopefully, that drive the model. We've got the profile sketch, which is this one here. It looks quite complicated, but it's just a simply drawn series of circles and lines to try and make some kind of cornice-like moulding. Your profile sketch, and in the blue line is the path sketch, along which that profile is going to be extruded or swept. The 2 important things about setting up sweeps, which sometimes people who haven't used them before get a bit confused about, is that the profile and the path have to be on kind of perpendicular or close to perpendicular planes. So what I mean by that is, let's have a look, turn on the planes here. We can see that this profile sketch, this is on the front plane, on that plane there. This relates to the front plane. And this path sketch has to be ideally on one of the other 2, if you're using those standard planes, one of the other 2 planes. It can't be on the same plane as your profile sketch, and that's often the common mistake those who haven't done sweeping before tend to make. So you'll create your profile sketch on one plane, and then your path sketch on a perpendicular plane to that profile sketch. The other thing that's really important is that this path sketch and this profile sketch have to be connected somewhere. If there's a gap between where this line meets this profile sketch, Fusion can't sort of jump that gap, if you like. They have to be connected or pierced. And those are the kind of the things that you just got to remember that you've got to get right in sweeps. Other than that, it's very straightforward. So, what I think, because we've got a lot to get through tonight, I'm not going to ask you all to redraw this profile sketch in the detail that I've shown you there, but what I suggest you do is do something similar. Okay, so I'm just going to edit this sketch so you can see what I've done there. It's quite a complex sketch, and I don't want to spend the next 20 minutes trying to model something or sketch up something like that. But what I suggest you do is just draw a rectangle and have some kind of curvy line or some kind of feature within it. So for instance, I'm going to create a sketch on a front plane. And what I'm going to do, to make my life easier, I'm going to start at the origin point, draw a two-pointed rectangle or a two-cornered rectangle out, give it dimensions if you want, and then I'm just going to do some kind of wiggly line. Something like that. And this is the profile we're going to use to sweep. So the reason I've chosen that origin point to start from for my rectangle is that it's going to help me really easily connect the profile path, the sweeping path, to that same origin point when I come to do that. You don't have to use the origin point, but it helps, if that makes sense in your overall model to do that. So once we've got something like that, I'm just going to click on Finish Sketch. And this is important, but we need to finish the sketch and then start a new sketch for the path. So this is the profile. I'm going to finish the profile sketch. And I'm going to create a new sketch. And this time, if you remember, I don't want to create it on this front back plane. I want to create it on one of these other two planes. And I'm going to choose, in this case, the top bottom plane here. We can see what's happened as that piece of paper is turning around and we're looking at it straight on. All we can see is basically we're looking down on top of that profile sketch, and all we can see is that kind of line because we're looking down directly from above on it. But we're going to start drawing some kind of wiggly line or some kind of curve from that origin point. And we know it's going to connect because our corner rectangle was started from that origin point as well. So something like this. I'm going to zoom out a bit. Snap it to the origin point, put it somewhere over there, and give it a bit of curvature. So that's what we're trying to get. So instead of unlike extruding and revolves where you have just one sketch which drives the feature, with sweeping, you're going to need two sketches or two types of geometry to drive the feature. We're going to need the profile and the path.
On that, on the path, you've got one end of the path connected to that point. Could it be the middle of the path connected just at any point?
Yes, it can be. Yes, and you can do complete loops as well. And the next one we'll have a look at is a complete loop as well. So yeah. You can also, we probably won't have time to look at 3D sketches as well. So you can do a 3D sketch and your sketch doesn't have to be just on a plane, as long as it's still connected and that sweep can run along that 3D sketch, you could do that as well.
So it just uses the edge?
Sorry? Yeah, it just uses the edge.
Any edge as long as they're connected.
Exactly. Yeah, and if you've already got a piece of geometry, say you've already got a body model that's already there, you can use a line that's on that piece of geometry as well,
so
as long as it's connected.
If you had a tabletop, for example, you could use this to do your router edge design.
Yeah.
And then sweep around it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good use of a sweep. Absolutely, especially if it's a curved table or something like that. Yeah, indeed. So once we've got our profile and our path, we're going to finish that sketch as well. And we should have something that looks like that. Two sketches connected on perpendicular planes. Then we're ready to sweep. We go over to the Create menu, and about a third of the way down, we've got Sweep. We get our Sweep dialog box popping up. There's quite a lot of different types of sweep, so I'm just going to focus on the single path type for now. And we've got two questions. We've got Fusion asking us, what is our profile sketch and what is our path sketch? So profile is selected first, so I'm just going to hover over the bit that I want to profile Okay, so I'm going to click on that one. It's been selected. Go over to dialog box to the path, select that, and then hover over the path. And it should give you a little preview of what it's going to do. And you can see if it's going to work. There are times when it's not going to be able to mathematically compute your sweep. If your path is too of an acute angle to your profile, Fusion simply may not be able to compute your sweep, and you may get an error message in the bottom corner saying, you know, cannot compute into self-intersecting geometry or something like that. And what you'll have to do is go back and adjust your path profile or adjust the way you're trying to model this. There are limitations what you can do with
I have the
sweeping.
same thing happen with mine. I changed the orientation to parallel and then it worked.
Yeah, so generally we've got two types of orientation. We've got perpendicular and parallel. Perpendicular basically means that as this profile is running along this path, that profile will always be perpendicular to this path line. You can change that to parallel, and generally speaking, you're always going to use perpendicular. It's quite rare that you might want to use parallel for an actual, you know, thing. In my experience, perpendicular is more useful, but it's another way. So for perpendicular, instead of that profile path sort of moving around in a radial way along that path, this will stay and in parallel to the same orientation of the sketch that's been created. So it stays like that, as opposed to doing that.
If I change mine back to perpendicular, I get unable to create a valid body because the lateral edge starts off the profile in the opposite direction of the sweep direction.
I do wish they'd make the error messages a bit less,
Yeah.
you know, cryptic, frankly.
So does that mean I put the sketch on the wrong side, or?
No, I would say if you go back and just edit your path sketch, edit that one. So if you zoom in down, yeah, you would have thought that would have been okay. It doesn't look too bad. No, it doesn't look too bad. But you can just try adjusting your path and seeing if you make it sort of straight coming up here. So if you click on people, yeah, try that. And it might be that's too tight. It's just as it's trying to actually bend that shape around that path. If it's going to self-intersect and make a shape which actually couldn't be created, it's not going to compute it because it would be, you know, incorrect, if that makes sense.
That was the error I got first time, was intersection.
Yeah, it's quite common with
I got it again, but changing to parallel works. I'll leave it with it. I'll investigate later.
You can also, just like extruding, you can taper things. So you can make things flare out and taper in, should you wish. Only occasionally useful, but occasionally very useful. So you can do a minus or a plus to make it taper in or taper out. And again, it will tell you if it can't compute something. If you try and taper something in particular, and it can't sort of compute that, those paths would start intersecting again. It will tell you that there's an issue. It will create a valid body, which is quite common in my experience with sweeping. So it can only really be used under the correct circumstances, and it can only really model something which could actually be made, if that makes sense. You can't model something which is like an impossible virtual model with sweeping. You can also twist things along the path, which is a really handy thing. And in the next example, we'll see that in more detail. But if you want something to twist along the path, you can twist it by degrees, minus degrees. It'll twist how you want. So you can do quite complex shapes quite quickly. But it's quite specific in the kind of things you might want to do. In my experience, it's as you just said, sometimes putting edges for routing on rebates on edges of curved things, it's really useful for. I've done a load of stuff with variable chamfers along a curved edge, and a swept cut was really useful for that. The classic one used to be if you ever wanted to model the old-fashioned telephone cables, you know, the helical cables. That's an obvious type of a sweep. There is now, wonderfully, a shortcut for that in Fusion. Which is, you've got a coil function, so you can do just standard coils in the coil wizard, so you no longer have to do that. But that's a classic swept shape, that kind of thing. So if you were wanting to do that, I'm not going to show you in one app, you can investigate. This is essentially a shortcut for doing specifically coils, and it's a swept form, but it's a quicker way of doing that coil form. So have a play with that at some point if you want to. It's particularly useful if you want to create screw threads that aren't in the standard list of screw threads when you come to actually model threads up. That's one really useful application for it.
Well, as an engineer, I'd question why you're trying to create a non-standard screw thread.
Yeah, absolutely. But it happens. Yeah.
3D printing.
3D printing, yeah. Or you're trying to match a screw thread which just isn't in Fusion's standard list, which has happened to me on more than one occasion. The other thing, just to mention, which is another shortcut for sweeping, there's also a pipe function within Fusion. So below coil, you've got pipe, and this is an example here of a pipe that's been created quickly. So you can, if you think about what a pipe is, it's going along a series of turns. That's a swept form as well. But with the pipe function, you can basically, it'll give you some standard shapes, circles, triangles, and I think rectangles for the section of the pipe. You can tell it to make it hollow and whatever dimensions you want, and you just have to specify the path. You don't have to draw the profile sketch. So again, it's a shortcut of making, if you want to do a load of pipe work, you don't have to sweep stuff, you can just use the pipe tool. One of my clients got so excited about this, he works with gases. He went away after learning Fusion and did a virtual model of his entire facility with all the pipe work using 3D sketches and the pipe function. And it made it a lot quicker, so it's a handy thing. But I'm not going to go into detail about it now. It's for you to explore and have a look at. It shouldn't be an exam or anything. I just wanted to let you know. If you want to do sweeps, you've got the original, sweep function, but you've also got shortcuts with the coil and the pipe functions as well. So, has everyone got something that looks like that? Has everyone had a degree of success in creating a sweep? Great. Before we move on to the next sweep example, one thing I haven't really mentioned, as per usual, one thing I haven't mentioned, which I'm sure most of you know anyway, if you want to reuse a sketch that you created for something else, so for instance, the sketch for this profile here, this decorative sweep, you can reuse the same sketch to do something else. You don't have to redraw it or anything like that. You can just go back and turn this sketch on and extrude from it. So, for instance, I was talking with Charles about this earlier on. I wanted to make, say for instance, you wanted to make some kind of tool for actually creating this out of, freeform out of plaster. You want that kind of tool. You can use the same sketch you created for the actual sweep itself to create that tool as well. And that's simply a case in this instance of just extruding that form. So all that was done there was have that sketch turned on and select the appropriate other side, if you like, of the negative side of the decorative sweep that was created to create that tool. And so you can use that same sketch time and time again to drive different features, so you don't have to redraw things or trace them, if you like. And then all that was done there was added a little handle on, so you can actually make.
Use it like plaster.
Exactly. Yeah. I just thought I'd mention that. I'm sure you're all aware you can reuse sketches time and time again. And good practice is not to have loads of, sketch, feature, but if you can put things all on one sketch or less sketches and drive various features from those fewer sketches, it's always going to make your life easier when you're modeling. So that's just your basic sweep. I thought I'd show you one more example, which I sent you, which is a bit of fun, but has always been quite popular, which is not this one. Let's open up the one I sent you, that would be better. Sweep example 2. Again, let's turn off the body so we can see, again, the two sketches which drives the feature. So we've got our profile, our shape here, and our path this time. This time it's a complete circle. So you can have completely, you know, you can have loops and it will sweep around the loop as well. Just in terms of how that profile was created, this sketch here. I know we've covered this before, but let's see. Any ideas how you would go about creating this form, or this sketch rather, from scratch, making it easy on yourself and quick to do? Or I can just show you how I went about it, if you like. Something like this, I mean, we can break this down. What do we know about it? It looks like it's a repeating pattern. So we only have to draw a bit of it, don't we? It's kind of hexagonal. So I started off with a hexagon, just as a guide. And then I used a particular type of arc. And I thought I'd just show you another type of way of drawing an arc. So I've shown you a couple. I'll show you the last one now, just for completion, if you like. So I'm going to create a new design and start from scratch on this. I'm going to create a sketch on the front plane, for instance. We've got a polygon tool, which is a really, really useful tool. If you haven't used polygon tool before in sketch mode, very handy indeed. You've got two ways of drawing polygons, circumscribed or inscribed. And basically, the circumscribed, your polygon diameter will be set by an internal circle diameter. And the inscribed, the dimension will be set by an external circle. Makes sense when you actually see it. So let's do one. So when you click on the polygon tool, you click the center point somewhere, and you just move your mouse out to give it some kind of radial dimension. So you can see at the moment it's about 50. You can see that this circle here is defining that, you know, the size of the hexagon, if you like. If you want to change the number of sides on your polygon, you can just tab, and you can change the number of sides. It's a really quick way of modeling or drawing an equilateral triangle. Very handy. Any other polygon, just give it a number of sides. So if you ever want to do tetrahedrons and stuff like that, and, you know, polygonal shapes, use the polygon tool, obviously. Oops. 50 again. 6. So I'm just going to click somewhere. I've got a hexagon, but it's kind of on the skew width. So what might we use to make that sort of straight? What kind of constraints do you think? Any ideas?
The L shape.
This one?
That one.
Coincident. Coincident sort of joins two things together.
Okay, yeah. Perpendicular? No,
Horizontal, vertical, that's a good plan. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to choose a surface. Well, it doesn't really matter which way around you want it. I'm going to put mine like so. So yeah, horizontal vertical is a good idea on that one. So I'm just using this hexagon as a guide, so I'm going to turn it into a construction line. So if you remember construction lines, select what you want, and over at line type in your sketch palettes, just click on construction to toggle between construction and solid line. And I'm going to do one more construction line somewhere up here. And this is going to help me center that arc that I'm going to draw to create that curved shape. So if I go to create and arc, this time we're going to use center point arc. I think I showed you 3-point arc last time, so center point arc. Kind of does what it says on the tin. You specify a center point, 1 point of the starting arc, and you can just draw your arc over to the other side. So what I used to do was just end up drawing circles rather than arcs, and you end up with bits of circles everywhere. So this is a much nicer way of drawing using arcs, which I got into bad habits with, but I'm trying to get back into good habits and always use arcs rather than circles and then trimming them back. It's just quicker. So we've got our arc there, and then it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? What can we do to this arc to get it to go all around the other 6 sides? Any ideas? A pattern. What kind of pattern? Circular. Create menu, circular pattern, select the object, select the center point. It always defaults to 3 instances for some reason in Fusion. Not quite sure why. I'm going to change it to 6. And we've got a revolve, or a circular pattern rather, of 6 versions of that center arc. Click OK. And you can see that these obviously have connected themselves, and we've got that closed loop. So we could just, if we wanted to now, just use that, but if we want to put in a radius, it was the last thing I did, was put in a radius or a fillet in the modify menu. And if you just select the 2 elements you want to fillet, work your way around. And then give it a value. Mine's currently, I think, a bit too big, so I'm going to change it to something like that. It's pretty quick and simple. I thought it's just worth showing you center arcs and how you go about creating a shape like that quite quickly. I didn't. Copying fillets round, I wouldn't necessarily try doing that as a circular array. I think the simplest thing is literally just to go around and click them. You could, I suppose, work out how you could do it and pattern the whole thing, but it's a bit more complex. Sometimes it's quicker just to click things, other times not. So once we've got our profile sketch, finish the sketch, and I'm going to create the circle that it's going to run round. So if you remember, you need to create a new sketch, so your profile and path have to be on different sketches and at different planes. So I'm going to click on Create Sketch, and this time I'm going to choose this plane here, okay, the top bottom plane, that one there. Once you click on that, it's going to spin around and you're looking at the top of the profile you've just created. So all we can see is that straight line as we're looking down on top of that hexagon. But this time, instead of, if we're going to create a circle, we want that circle to end some, in line or connecting to that origin point. So I'm going to have to stop the circle somewhere over here and create that circle. So the best thing to do here at this point is just to draw a line so that circle connects using a construction line. Something like this. So I'm going to click to the origin point, put a line over here somewhere, and turn it into a construction line. Next, I'm just going to create a circle and make sure it snaps that origin point, like so. And you'll have something that looks like that, whatever size you want.
Did you not just use a 2-point circle instead of the construction line, and then not use the center circle?
Possibly. It's whether or not. What I found with Fusion is if you click on the 2-point circle, if you want it in line, it might end up being offline like that.
I see.
That's why I wanted it there. So this was perpendicular at this point. But yeah, you could do a 2-point circle, but I would still have this construction line, and you start a circle there, start a circle there. I don't think it makes much difference, but.
Which circle did you use again, sorry?
I just use the standard center point circle, which is my default. I find there's like 6 different ways of drawing circles, and it's a bit too much, really.
I missed how you kind of offset it though. Did you just eyeball that, or?
Yeah. So all I did, I created this construction line, okay, and I started the circle, snapping the center point somewhere along here to that, snapping it to that one there.
Missed the construction line.
The construction line, I think, is quite an important bit, really, on this one. But you can see it looks, you know, we've got our profile and we've got our path on two different sketches, and those planes are perpendicular to each other. And this is connecting to one element on this sketch. At this point, you know, the middle, you know, the center point of this profile. You could connect it to any other points. You know, it doesn't have to be to the center. It will make a slightly different, might make a slightly different form if you connect it to one of the other points, possibly. But the center point's an obvious place to connect it to. So once you've got to that point, finish the sketch, and that's what we're trying to get to, is those two sketches. So what we need to do once we're at that point is go into the Create menu and hit Sweep. And if you remember the profile path, hover over the profile path till it turns grey. Select it, click on Select the Path, and select the path. And if you've got it right, it will give you a preview. Like so. And it's picked up the entire circle and made a connected hoop, if you like. What's really fun here with the twist angle, you can play around with the twist angle and get the whole thing twisting around the loop. To do that nicely, I think, if I remember rightly, you have to have a multiple or divisible of 360, otherwise it won't do it. It won't sort of connect nicely at the end. So I just put in a random twist angle of 257 and it's not going to work. So let's try 360. It didn't work this time, twist angle. Take it back. There we go, 180. Anything that's, you know, 360 is a multiple of or divisible of, it should twist around that because it will connect nicely at the end, if you see what I mean. I think the one I sent you had, I think, 720. Give it a tighter twist. There we go. So any multiple or divisible of 360 will get it connecting nicely. Kind of pointless model, although we did actually make one of these for someone. One nice little angle for someone, but just, you know, it shows you what Sweep can do and where you can use it for more than just doing rebates for router paths and things like that. So does that make sense? Are everyone happy with sweeping and what it is about and how to do it? Anyone want me to go over any of it again?
Yeah, I didn't get the whole circular bit.
The whole circular bit?
Yeah.
So,
It was the concentric circle.
sorry?
Yeah, it was lengthening it
To creating that circle.
creating the concentric circle.
Let's do that bit again. Do that. So we need to create a sketch that is perpendicular, so to the profile. So in this case, I'm going to be using this one here, this plane, top-bottom plane. That's the important bit. And then that turns that profile, so we're looking down on it from above. The way I approached it was to create a line, a construction line, from the origin point, straight out to the right, horizontal line, like that. Turn it into a construction line with selecting the line type and going over to construction, toggle it, and then just getting a center diameter circle. So up here in the Create menu, that one there. Start the center point of that circle somewhere on the line, and even get snap to that, but somewhere on the line. Draw it out and snap it at origin point. That's what you're trying to get to.
That's a construction line.
So, on mine, I've got the, I can see the original sketch, and then the other, that's,
Oh,
it's got on the body, a slight line.
Have a look.
Join it,
I wouldn't know if I was here last week.
and the original sketch.
No, that's just a modelling line. Yeah, that's a modelling line, so don't worry about
Puts
that.
it in
You can see
Blender.
it blending nicely.
Yeah.
That's how easy it is to put in Blender.
Extra
That's something I've not done too much yet.
but that's
Actually, it is showing it as a, that face.
Okay. Now how do I make it go around the circle?
get that with parallel modelling or modelling.
You want to zoom in,
Line, but that's not a split.
and then it's the one you just hovered over, so you go through it.
Yeah, so that's just a modelling function.
And
So
then
you've done it right.
is, leave us through the ball. Did we just use sweep or?
Sweep, it's sweep, yeah. So,
Alright.
And then select that one,
sweep,
and then if you press select on path, and then select the, there we go.
got it?
And you can use twist angle.
Twist angle, something 360 or 720 or something that's multiple or divisible of 360. Give it a bit of a twist. Okay, so I'll move swiftly on from sweep because it's quite limited its uses, and we'll move on to lofting, which is far more useful, frankly, if everyone's happy with we've covered sweeping. Okay, so we've looked at extrude, revolve, sweep. The final one we're going to look at is lofting. Let's just turn off these other ones so we can have a closer look at this one here. So for those of you that haven't used lofting before or aren't that familiar with it, this is a much more powerful modelling tool in some ways. This is where you can basically take two profiles, or in fact as many profiles as you like, of different shapes or different designs, connect them together, and Fusion will kind of merge all of them together to create this complex shape. So this one here, we can see we've got an oval at the top, and we've got a rectangle at the bottom, and Fusion has worked out how best to connect those two, and that's called a loft. That's the loft in its simplest terms. But as I say, you can have as many profiles as you want. It doesn't have to be two, it can be multiples. You can also basically create guide rails as well to define the outside or the sort of external shape. Kind of got to think a bit like as you're creating a wireframe of the shape that you want, and then Fusion's kind of filling in the gaps to make a smooth shape. And it'll always try and make a smooth, curved, blended shape. It's not going to make angular shapes within this lofting process. So it's always going to try and sort of blend them and make them smooth by and large. It's a really powerful function for doing more complex forms, which I'll show you some of the use cases for lofting in particular. Well, most of the rest of this evening is going to be about lofting in one way, shape or form, whether it's in solid modelling or surface modelling. Because once you understand lofting and its full potential, that really releases you to make all sorts of really interesting shapes, as I said. So I'm going to open up the other example I sent you, which is the loft example Geno hammer. You all right? Yeah, absolutely. This is actually being recorded, so for once, as long as the recording works, you can catch up on the bit we just missed.
It didn't work last time.
No, it didn't,
It
unfortunately.
took like 20 minutes. You couldn't get it.
Oh,
out.
sorry.
Well-
I just fucked the lessons up. I
No,
wasn't even
that's
here.
fine.
Well, I was going to use Google Meet, but I then found out that Google Meet recordings has been removed from us as a function,
They just
as an
don't
institution.
give
So
us their features anymore.
no, now we're out of the pandemic, they've removed it, so we're using another solution.
Sorry, mate, did you get my email?
Yes, I did.
Sorry.
No, that's no worries at all. So, if everyone can open up the loft example Geno hammer, we'll have before we get stuck into having a go at this, perhaps we'll just, work through it together, and we won't necessarily get through the whole thing. This whole item here is a completely lofted shape, okay? There's nothing in this that hasn't been lofted one way, shape or form. It's made up of components. We've got the hammerhead, okay? We've got the handle, and we've actually got a little wedge in the handle to actually, wedge out the handle to the hammerhead. All those three components have been lofted. How do we know it's been lofted? Well, the only way we can sort of work out when something's been lofted or when best to loft something is if you can't use extrude, revolve, or sweep to create a form. That's when you're going to have to use loft. It's too complex a shape to use those other things. So when you're designing something, especially if you're reverse engineering something, you kind of have to analyze that shape to decide how best to model it. Is it an extrusion? Is it a revolve? Is it a sweep? Or is it a combination of those things all put together? And if it's not one of those things, your only other option really is to use the loft function. So, for instance, something like this, what kind of modeling function is that? Could be an extrude, could also be a revolve, pretty straightforward. This one here? Any ideas? A revolve. So it's quite easy to start sort of analysing shapes and try and get them to fit those classic modelling types. And if you can't get them to fit one of the, revolve, extrude, and sweep, then lofting is where we're going to go. So we can see that basically we've got a hammerhead here, which obviously sort of gets smaller in the middle and wider again, it kind of flares out. So you couldn't do that with an extrude easily, I can see, because you could taper half of it and then mirror it across, but then you'd have an angle. You wouldn't get that nice, smooth, curving shape. Equally with the handle, let's have a look at how the handle looks. So we've got a shape down here, which is an oval, and it's moving to a rectangle in the middle, and then to, finally, a rectangle at the top. So that, again, is sort of morphing between, an ellipse and a rectangle to create that lofted shape. So when you want to morph between different shapes, a loft is what you need. So the way I approach doing this, and there's always, as I say, there's always a number of ways of doing anything in Fusion. I felt this was the best way of doing it. So let's start with the hammerhead itself. I'm just going to rewind my sketch. I'm going to turn on hammerhead component and just look at the first sketch. So the very first sketch that I created was kind of like a middle profile of that head shape. You can cut it in half, that's the middle profile. I'm just going to run through how I went about it, then we can have a go at doing it, so rather than clicking along with me, unless you want to. So that was the first point, so that's somewhere to start. The next step was to create a construction plane for the end profile, flared out one end of that hammerhead, and then draw a sketch on that. Looks an awful lot like this one here. Any idea how I created this shape? Yeah! Excellent, well done. Yeah, exactly that. So didn't try and redraw anything there, I just took that form there. You can see the purple projection lines, projected, and then from that projection just did an offset a certain amount, or whatever I wanted to do. So pretty quick and simple to create that slightly larger shape a little bit further away. And then finally, I did exactly the same the other side. So you think we can almost begin to, in our mind's eye, see that as a wireframe. We haven't got anything connecting it. We didn't perhaps need to in this instance with these guide rails. But we've got larger, smaller, larger, so we can kind of see it's going to make, hopefully, that shape when we come to loft it. So the loft itself creates that form. Before we go on, I'm just going to open up the loft dialog box so you can understand what it looks like and what the process is. So
The loft what box?
The loft dialog box. I'm just editing that loft. And what we'll do, I'm just going to talk you through the hammerhead bit, and then perhaps we'll have a go at doing it together. So we can see in the loft dialog box, a bit more complex than some of them, but it's asking what profiles do you want to loft, okay? Profile 1, profile 2, profile 3. What you don't want to do is profile 1, profile 2, profile 3, because it will get confused. It will try and loft to there, and then loft back to there again. So logically speaking, you'll start at one end, profile 1, profile 2, profile 3. That's it for this particular loft. That's all that was required. Just selecting those 3 profiles, and that's the shape that's created. Okay? And then Fusion will work out that kind of nice, smooth, curved shape. There's lots of other stuff you can do with loft, but I'm just going to show you that bit for now. So shall we have a go at drawing that hammerhead together? Let's have a go. Right, so I'm just going to create a new design, and I'm going to create a sketch, and I'm going to use, it doesn't really matter which one, I'm going to use the right left plane. I'm going to click create a sketch on the right left plane. Then I'm going to create a center rectangle. There's different ways you could create a square, but center rectangle is one of them. So I can create rectangle, center rectangle. Starting at the origin point, to define the center point of the rectangle, I'm just going to give it a value, let's call it 35 by 35. It's okay. Now, if you remember, our hammer had sort of curved sides to it, that profile. It wasn't just a straight rectangle. So I'm going to turn this into a construction line by selecting a tool and putting into construction line. So now I need to create just a curved path around here. That kind of slightly bulbous shape. So we've just done something very similar, haven't we, with the bangle, where we created that curved shape. So we're going to do exactly the same process again. We're going to use that center point arc. This time, however, I'm going to create a construction line again from the midpoint of one of these lines, doesn't really matter which one, down here somewhere. And again, I'm going to turn it into a construction line. So we've got something like that. And then finally, I'm going to create that center point arc by clicking the center point somewhere on this construction line we just created. The first end of that arc over there, and then draw it round. So we're trying to achieve something like that. That makes sense? So you just grab the center point. So it's just like drawing a circle, you're just drawing part of a circle.
Change the reference line, sketch line to control the curve.
Yeah, yeah, you can indeed. You can play around with it, dragging it up and down, giving it the kind of curve that you want, or you could obviously give it a dimension, visual dimension. So I'm going to make mine quite shallow, be easier. So once we've got our curve like this, we need it on the other 4 sides. How are we going to do that? Circular pattern. It all gets quite repetitive, doesn't it, CAD? You use the same things over and over again. So circular pattern, I'm going to select the arc, which was already selected, and the center point. It defaults to 3 instances, so I'm just going to change that to 4. Click OK. You can still play around with changing the nature of your arc if you want once you've done that, because they're all related to each other. They're all patterned, obviously. And that's it. That's your profile sketch for that first profile sketch, for that middle point of the hammer. That's a tricky bit done, really. So we're going to finish the sketch. So the next thing we have to do is create another sketch a little bit further away for the end of the hammerhead. So how are we going to create that? What's going to be the process?
Construction or something.
Offset plane, absolutely. So construct, offset plane, or the big button above, construct. That's the one. Going to select that plane we've just drawn that sketch on, and we're going to drag a plane out somewhere. Maybe on mine it's going to be around about, let's call it 70 millimeters. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been too prescriptive about dimensions here, but just do something that works for you. So create the offset plane, and now we're going to create a sketch on that offset plane. Right. Clicking create sketch and making sure we click on that plane that we've just created. It'll spin round, so we're looking at it normal too. And if you remember, how are we going to get that geometry onto that plane? Project tool. So P on the keyboard, or it's right down here in this stupid menu, tucked away down there. It's so annoying, you use it all the time when they put it down there. So all you have to do is go around and select the elements you want to project. So in this case, those four. And hit OK. So now we've got another sketch which is exactly the same size as our previous one, but we want to make this one a bit bigger. So what are we going to do for that?
The one we just projected is the purple one.
Yes, so yes, any geometry that's purple, that kind of pale purple, has been projected. Yeah. So we're going to create an offset by going up to modify, offset or O on the keyboard. It's another one you use all the time, so it's worth getting used to that. The offset dialog box pops up. We're going to select, if we hover over each one of these, I thought it might do it as a chain selection, but it hasn't. Select each one of those, and then we can drag it out to make it a bit bigger. Maybe in this case, I'll give it an offset of, let's make it a bit crazy, make it 8 millimeters. Yeah, whatever you want. I don't know what size you made yours in the first place. Let's make it around 8. And click OK. And we can finish the sketch. Okay. So now we've got that second sketch a little bit away from that first sketch and a bit bigger. So now finally we need to create another sketch over here for the other side of the hammerhead. I should mention here that you could just loft these two, and then what could you do? There's a very specific reason I'm not doing that, and I'll show you that later. So we're going to create another sketch over here, and just recreate this over there. It'll all become apparent.
Can I take a guess? Would it technically like rotated around? So the right plane would be.
Is it so that when you put the spline from the handle through, you don't have two bodies to deal with?
No. No one's going to guess it. It's just an awkward thing that Fusion does, actually. I'm just avoiding.
I think
and it's to do with,
rather than giving you a smooth curve, like that, around.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it once, and I'll show you. Let's just loft this, okay? Or perhaps I'll do it, and you just watch this bit, and I'll show you the problem.
Just fun to see where.
Just fun to see that this is. So go to loft now. I can select for the first profile. I want both of these, okay? So I want the whole thing to be blue. If I just selected, that bit, it would just loft that hollow element. So both elements, and then I'm going to click over here for profile 2. Now you can see what obviously Fusion does. It makes a straight, loft from one to the other. So if I move that across, as you say, you might say it'd be a wedge. But there is one thing you can do in Fusion to sort of curve these off, tangential, if you like, or perpendicular, tangential to that profile. So if you go over to profile 2, where it says connected, we look at the drop-down menu and change it to direction. Is basically put that curve in, so it's starting off at a nice smooth tangent, a perpendicular, if you like, tangent to that one. So then you could mirror it across. If I clicked OK there. And then if I were just to mirror that, hey, that looks pretty good. We're almost there. But what have we got? And this is something that you noticed earlier on, Helen. We've got this line in the middle here. Now, it's not two bodies, it's one body. But this is kind of like a modelling feature of parasolid modelling occasionally, and it's the same with all this kind of software. It'll put in, it will leave these kinds of lines in place, and actually it can be a problem later on when you want to do other things. It can kind of get in the way, and that's why I wanted to get rid of it. So if you look at my example, you can see this one doesn't have that line in it. It's a smooth model all the way through. And I personally, when you're working with lofted shapes, it's always best to avoid these extra lines which Fusion sometimes puts in as a modelling function. So that's the reason, and there's a very specific reason when it comes to splitting the body later on, which I'll show you. That's why, when you're lofting, it's always best to have as few of those lines as possible, or any kind of 3D modelling, you want to reduce them, if at all possible. So going back to our design here, I'm just going to get rid of that and go back to where we were. So we're going to create the other sketch on the other side, this one over here. So what are we going to do? We're going to create another offset plane the other direction. No, you can't. It would be nice. I'm pretty sure you can't, actually. So
It's not that big.
yeah. Offset plane. So this time minus 70. Oh, not minus 710. There we go. And create a sketch on the plane we just created. And again, we can just now project that bigger sketch we've just done. So if you go to P on the keyboard, project, those four, click OK. We've now got that, if you like, mirrored sketch. So very quick and simple to do. We're just using that one sketch we've created in the first place and just using it again by projecting it and offsetting it. If you want to, if that's what your design needs you to do. It depends on what you're designing. So once you've got to that point, now we can go and loft. And profile 1, you remember we're going to go from one side to the other. Profile 1, profile 2 will be the middle sketch. And then profile 3 will be the end sketch. And you can see now it's made that nice curved shape. And now when I click OK, we won't, or we shouldn't, have that modelling line. Turn off the sketches. We can see we've got a nice, uninterrupted shape with any sort of modelling geometry in there. So it's always best to try and work towards that if at all possible. So the last thing I did on this hammerhead was just at this point just to fillet it a little bit. So I'm going to pop some fillets, go to the fillet tool in the modify menu. Just a little sort of aside about filleting. I'm going to put a 5mm filleting here. In terms of efficient filleting, it's good to always try and work towards obviously clicking as few times as possible with filleting. So the way I approach this fillet, because I want to fillet this side as well, if you're selecting lines, if you select these lines first, this will make a nice curved shape, and you'll select it in one go. Whereas if you've got hard corners between where those fillets are, you have to select each line you want to fillet, if that makes sense. So if you just bear that in mind when you're filleting, it might be simplest just to fillet faces in this instance. But it's just worth bearing in mind, that's one way of approaching it. So now I'm just going to select that line in one go and that line in one go. So we've got our finished hammerhead. Okay. It's got no hole in it for the handle, but we'll come to that in a bit. Does that make sense? That's all that first introduction to lofting. Good. Okay. Sorry if I'm speeding through this a bit. We've got quite a lot to get through tonight, so I just want to sort of keep the pace up a bit.
What value did you give it?
Sorry?
What value did you give it?
I just gave it a value of 5mm.
So do you finish sketch?
So I'm just going to go back to my original example here. And we're going to look in a bit more detail at the handle and how the handle is created before we have a go at doing it. So I'm going to go to that. No, something's not right. I've changed something there.
Create them.
I'm going to go to the handle, and I'm going to select the handle component so we can have a closer look and we can inspect how this was done. I'm just going to rewind to, I think let's have a look to the sketches that have been created for this. So there's one profile, okay? Another profile, and the third profile. So this time, it's just like the hammerhead, we've got 3 profiles driving the loft. A little rectangle up here, bigger rectangle for that kind of the midpoint of the handle, and then lofting down to an oval at the bottom. If we look from above, straight down on those sketches, we can see they're all kind of in line on the center point with each other. So we've got our center rectangle there, our bigger center rectangle, our oval, all showing the same center point. That's the easy bit, very similar to what we've just done. But if we want to define that loft shape in more detail, if we were just to loft those, we may not get the shape we want. Now we can put more profiles in. You can put as many profiles in as you like, but that's not always the best way of visualizing what it is you want. Sometimes you might actually want to draw some sketches which define this outside shape, making more of that wireframe, which is going to be lofted. So if I just turn on the next sketch, we can see that I've basically just drawn a spline from the midpoint of that side of that rectangle, you see that, down to one of those points on that ellipse, connecting them. It's a bit like sweeping. Those paths have got to be connected to that loft profile, otherwise it won't work. So a spline like that, just a simple 3-point spline, which was then mirrored across to make it the same on the other side. Then I did exactly the same process this way round to create another spline coming from this time the other side of the rectangle down to the other side of the ellipse. Does that make sense? To create that, again, that wireframe. You're trying to give users as much information as possible to make that slightly more complex shape. So obviously, as I say, we could do that by doing a number of profiles, but actually that's going to get really hard to do because at some point that rectangle is changing to an oval. And how are we going to do that in our own minds? How do we draw that kind of shape and know that it's going to be right? So we don't want to even try doing something like that. We're going to use guide rails instead to make it easier on ourselves. So if I just go into the loft, and we'll have a go at this together in a minute on our example. The only real difference between the hammerhead and what we've done now is we've got profile 1, profile 2, and this time we've got guides in this second dialog box down here, and I've selected those 4 guide rails that I've just created, and it'll give you this little preview. So we'll work through it in a minute, you can see how that works. But before we go on to that, I'll just open up this final secondary loft, going from this one to this one. Any idea why I just didn't do it as one loft? What's the benefit of doing it as 2 lofts? And it's a design decision in this case. What am I getting from doing it as 2 separate lofts as opposed to 1? Any ideas?
Sharp edge?
Yes, exactly. If I did that as one whole loft, it's going to try and blend that. And I actually decided I want it angular at this point. That's a design decision. If you want an angle, you can't do it in one whole loft. You're going to have 2 lofts kind of stuck together to create that angular shape and that curved shape. So exactly, yeah. And this secondary loft was very simple. Nothing else to it, just 2 surfaces joined together. And just a straight loft. No guidelines in there, I just allowed it to go straight. But again, if you wanted to, you could put curves in and make it a more curved shape and have a more defined angle. So these, again, just design decisions. Okay. So let's have a go at doing that handle. So if you remember, the way I started was at the top, and I wanted to draw this rectangle somewhere up here. I've got no plane up there I can draw on, so what are we going to do? Offset plane. And I'm going to put a plane in somewhere up there, let's say 25 millimeters, somewhere above that hammerhead. Click on Create Sketch. Click on the plane you've just created. And then to create that first, rectangle, what's the best tool for that, do you think, in our sketch? Center rectangle. And I'm going to give this a value, let's say 30 by 18. That's it for this one. That's going to be 30 by 18, I did, yeah. So if we turn it to look at it in 3D, we can see we've got that little rectangle hovering above our hammerhead. That's all we need for that first profile. So I'm going to click Finish Sketch. Now I need another rectangle somewhere down here. So yet again, it's going to be another offset. You can kind of see the pattern here. The constructional geometry used time and time again are offset planes and planes at an angle. So another offset plane. This time from perhaps this top bottom, and let's make it something like, let's make it minus 100. And again, we're going to create the sketch on the plane we've just created. And it's a bit like what we've just done. What might be the best way of making a slightly bigger version of this rectangle? Project it. Can we go straight to offset? No, we can't. So it would be nice almost to go straight to offset. We're going to have to project it first and then offset it. So in this case, I'm going to have to select all 4 lines to project. Project it. You can see it turns purple. And then offset, which is O on the keyboard. And let's just drag it out and give it an offset of minus 5. It might be plus 5 on your design. It depends on the way Fusion's feeling on your particular computer. I did it minus 100. It doesn't matter massively for this. We'll just get a slightly longer or shorter hammer handle. So click OK on that offset, and as we can see now, we've got below the hammerhead somewhere that bigger rectangle, which is going to flare out. Finish the sketch. And then we need to put in that little ellipse further down here. So again, it's yet another offset plane. So offset plane. And let's say, what looks about right. I'm going to get mine minus 450. But don't worry if it's not exactly that. So we've got our final plane down here. Create a sketch, click on the plane you just created, and now we're going to use the ellipse tool, which I'm not sure I've shown you yet, but I'm sure you're familiar with. In the Create menu of the Sketch toolbar, about halfway down under Polygon, we've got ellipse. It's just like drawing a center rectangle, so let's click on that. You start off by clicking on the center point of your ellipse, so in this case it's going to be the origin point. Then you click out one line, as it were, for one length or one side. I don't know what the terminology is here. Click it once, and then click it again to kind of get the ellipse that you want. You can define it and give it dimensions if you want to as well, either now or at a later stage. But let's just do a free form ellipse for now. Something that looks a bit like that. So pretty quick to just create offset planes, do some kind of profile on them. Ideally, if you are making a symmetrical object, let's try and use the origin point or the same point for the center points of those profiles, just to make it, a better designed object. So just like the hammerhead, now we've got our three profiles. But before we loft it, do you remember we need to create those guide rails? That's what they're known as in the Infusion guide rails, to create that slightly more curved bottom part of the handle. So once we've created those three profiles, we've finished the sketch, if you haven't done that already. Now we need to select basically the plane which cuts through those in half, okay? That's the plane we're going to draw on. So you think about, we want to connect, let's try and zoom in a bit, it's very small. We want to basically cut this in half and have one of these splines starting here and ending down here. So we need to select the plane that's on, and this is the really crucial bit, making sure you're on the right plane. Which plane do you think it will be?
The other one's the front.
Yes, the front back plane. Absolutely, because we've drawn it on the origin, those planes which are always there, we can use. We don't have to make a new plane. So I'm going to create a sketch, click on the front back plane, click OK. So what I'm going to do is just going to grab my spline tool, zoom in a bit, and I'm going to try and I'm failing to snap my spline to that rectangle. It's important that it is snapped to that rectangle, because if it's not, it won't be connected. But it's not picking anything up. So what are we going to do you think, to bring that geometry that we've already got to this sketch? Project again, exactly. So this is why I use project time and time again. So I'm going to click P and click on project. Now what I want is, I can select the whole line if I wanted, but I'm just going to select the end point of that line. That's what we want to snap to. So I click on that, and I zoom out and go down to the ellipse and do the same thing down here, and click on, turns it orange, and then click it to select it. So you want those 2 points selected. Now we're going to be able to snap our spline to those projected points because we brought them in from the other sketches we've created. These are the really crucial bits to make sure your loft works to get right. So once you've done that, hit OK. Now when we go to our spline, I can snap to the point we've just projected. So you can see the little blue square around that point. It means it will snap to it. I'm going to snap to that. I'm going to create a 3-point spline, something like that, and then snap to finish it off down here, and then hit the little tick button to finish the spline. Then I can start manipulating the spline however I want. And I'm going to do, oh, I don't know, something like that. It's entirely up to you, obviously. Let's do something like that. The nice thing about this is once we've done our loft and we want to go back and play with that shape of that handle, we can just go back into this sketch and just pull that spline around and change it, and then rebuild, and you can see what it looks like. But once you've got the spline you're happy with, what are we going to do to that spline? We're going to mirror it. How are we going to mirror it? Well, at the moment, we don't have a mirror line, so we're going to have to draw a mirror line. This one's not already there. So we're going to go to the line tool. And again, can I snap to anything? No, I can't. So I can't actually snap to that line tool there. What I can do is, instead of doing that, so I just need this as a mirror line, I can go up to the origin point, which I know is in the middle, and snap to that, and just draw a line down there. It doesn't even have to go all the way through your drawing. It's just a line to reference around. Yeah. The mirror construction line? Oh, sure, I'll go back to that bit again. So we need to create a mirror construction line, so we know it knows what to mirror around. So I'm going to go to the line tool, and I'm going to click on the origin point, the one that's in the middle of the hammerhead, and then just draw a line. Let's do it all the way through. And let's turn that into, well, more precisely, a center line, because it is in the center. And now we've got that reference to which we can mirror our spline. So create menu, mirror, click on the spline you want, and because we've selected a center line, it should automatically pick up that center line. And it will automatically now have snapped this line to that rectangle, because it's an exact mirror, obviously. That's what we're trying to achieve, that kind of process of having those guide rails as a wireframe. So once you're happy with that, you finish the sketch. Now we can go and do the same thing on the perpendicular plane, but I think just because of speed, we won't do that tonight. We can always go back and put in more guide rails should you see fit, just doing the same thing again. But we can just go with that for now and have a go at lofting that. So once you've finished, go to the create menu, and the loft is about a third of the way down. We click on loft. And I'm going to, it doesn't really matter which one I start with. I'm going to start with the ellipse. I'm going to select the ellipse, profile 1. And then I'm going to select the both elements of the rectangle, so it's a solid object. So now we need to tell it guide rails. Okay, so there's actually two types of guide rails. We've got this icon over here. We've got guide type. We've got either rails or center line. So the rails are kind of obviously the ones on the outside of the object, but you can also have a center line which just defines a loft by having a center line between two profiles. Rarely so useful, I have to say. Guide rails are the ones which you probably want to use time and time again. So if yours isn't selected to rails, if yours is selected to centerline, make sure it's on guide type rails. And then you just go and click on the rails you want. So this one, you can see it does it. It's just selected one. If I go and select on the other side, it'll select both of them and it'll, loft the shape that includes those guide rails. And then just click OK. No, guide rails. So the center line is the one if you have a sort of a line connecting the two profiles in the center. Guide rails is the one you want. And I've demonstrated center line lofting loads, but I can't think of a single time I've actually used it, whereas guide rails are constantly useful, so it's good to understand. Let's have a look.
I missed last week. Halfway through, I got my missus, she needed petrol to go to work. I was like, I transfer her money. I was like, oh, wait till halfway through, but that was difficult. It's a bit too fast for me. I got overloaded. Sometimes it's good to do that, like, just watch the run through, and then I think it's an awesome thing that they're creating videos now.
Well, the good thing as well is you got timelines, so you can go back to the model he sent over.
Yeah. So you could do a combination of that.
Just remembering which one we're in.
I can't remember what happened now. I couldn't say I wanted to, and then while I was doing that, it ended up 3 moves ahead before. That's so good.
So we've got a handle, we've got half of a handle, so we just need to do the second bit, that kind of tapering up element. So again, I'm going to go to create loft. Now this time, I'm going to select my top rectangle. And I don't even need to go and open up my old sketch. I can just hover over this rectangle here and loft directly to it. Now I've missed one crucial step, which is just a bad habit of mine. I haven't created components from the outset, so I'm working all in bodies here. So apologies for that. I'm still trying to remember to work in components. I used SolidWorks for years and it worked completely differently. So just to say at the moment, instead of joining it, because at the moment if I do this, it'll join the hammerhead and the handle all together as one. I'm going to, in operation, I'm going to create a new body, okay, for this particular tapered loft. So So if you've rushed ahead and joined it, go back and turn it into a new body. And if we can see now, if I zoom in on this bit, we can see that these two bodies are kind of overlapping because we've got no sort of geometry line in between that intersection of those two bodies. So we kind of know we've got separate bodies, and we can look at the browser as well. We have got a body which is the hammerhead, and then we'll have, which I'll turn off for a minute, and then we've got the two bodies of our lofted handle, which I'm now going to have to join together. Any idea how I'm going to join them together? What function shall we use? No, that's where they've got a mechanical relationship and you want to have motion. You want to turn them into one body, combine. Yeah, because if you think about the wooden handle of this, it's going to be one component, isn't it? One thing. So under modify, combine. Target body and tool body, when you join things, don't matter. You can just select one and then select the other. Make sure the operation is on join, and keep tools is turned off, and click OK.
Does it need to be new component?
No, not at this. Well, you could make a new component at this stage. I'd suggest we make a new component in a minute and we name them hammerhead and hammer handle. And where I should have done in the first place. But now we've got two bodies, one being the hammerhead and one being the handle. But yes, let's make those into components. Now, this is something that happens quite a lot. If you're like me, you retrospectively have to turn something into a component because you've forgotten to do it the right way in the first place. How do we make a new component at this stage? You're going to remember.
Create component from body.
Yep, and where do we find that?
Right click on the body.
Wonderful. Yep. So let's go to body 2, right click on that. Create components from bodies. And then it'll just create this component, component 1. I'm going to name it by like a slow double click on that text box and call it hammerhead. And then do the same thing for, in this case, body 4. Right click on that. Create components from bodies. That component 2 on the body, on the browser. So if you look here under bodies, yeah, right click on that. Create components from bodies. And a slow right click on component 2 will enable you to change the text. That should have been in the first place. That's a bit fun, but that's life. For me, anyway. So we're almost there now with our handle. We might just want to do a couple more things just to refine it before we start with the next step. And the only thing I would do is put in some fillets, just to smooth it off. So I'm going to go to the fillet tool, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fillet this slightly sharp edge and just give that a slight radius. Let's say something around about 10 millimeters. Let's make it bigger than that, that's tiny. Make it 50 so we can actually see it. That's one. Then I'm going to do another filleting operation and select these 4 edges, if you like, of the hammerhead, and then give it a much smaller radius. Let's say something around about 3 millimeters. And as you can see with that fillet, it's kind of blending out into nothing because it's going into that oval shape. So it's kind of creating this, this almost like a variable fillet, it looks like. It moves from an angle to a curve. Hopefully, you can see that, it's quite straightforward lofting. It's just, being logical, creating your profiles, step by step, making sure they're on offset planes, making them aligned if they need to be aligned, creating guide rails, making sure guide rails are connected. It is building that wireframe. Helen?
I've realised that my first offset plane at the top of the head is not high enough. Can I edit it?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, we can go back and edit everything. What we need to do is find that offset plane, don't we? So we need to go back in our timeline, and if we just hover over any of these offset plane icons down here, we can actually give you a little preview of which one. So I can find out, it's this one I need, because it's turned blue. Now if I right-click on it and go to Edit Feature, you can just give that a bigger value, click OK, and the whole thing should just rebuild. So you can always go back and change things unless there's some reason you can't, but generally speaking, you can go back and change stuff. Say you wanted your handle to be a different shape, that curved spline, you could go back and change that. So if you're ever wondering where something is, it's not showing me there. We might have to go back and have a look. It should show me a little line on those, but it's not. So if you look at our original loft here for this handle, we want to change the shape of that. We're going to have to look at the sketches just before that loft in the timeline. So if you hover over and click on one of those sketches, it will highlight that sketch so we can see which sketch we might need to go to edit. So let's edit that. And let's make our handle curves a bit different should we wish to. So we can go back and change it. Finish the sketch, and then it should rebuild. So once you've got it set up, you can play around with it and, you know, start designing, if you like, the exact shape that you want pretty easily. Something rather unappealing about that shape. So I'm going to go back to that. So we've now got our handle and we've now got our head, but they're overlapping each other, and we need to make a hole in that head for our handle. How are we going to do that? What function?
Combine.
Combine? But we're going to use the reverse of combine. We use cut, aren't we? So let's go into, now, this is a good question where we have to think about the components we're in. Now, we've created components now, but I'm at the top level. Which component should I be in to do this part, do you think? The head. We're making a change to the head, so you go into the head component. And that's the thing you have to get used to with Fusion, remembering before you do something to go into the correct component, or the logical one. Let's go into that. We know we're in the right component because the rest is grayed out. Modify menu, combine. This time the target body and the tool body are important. So the target body is the thing we're trying to modify, which is the hammer head in this case. I'm going to click on that. The tool body, that's the thing we're making the shape with, and that's the hammer handle, so I'm going to click on that. Because I did a join as my last operation, it's defaulted to join, so I need to tell it this time to cut. And I also need to tell it to keep the tool, otherwise it will helpfully, you know, delete our hammer handle, which is not what we want. So I'm going to click on Keep Tools and click OK. Thinking about it, and now we can see that exact hole has been cut out of that hammerhead using the model of that lofted model as essentially as a tool for cutting it out. Very straightforward process. We'll use time and time again. Cut, combine, or combine cut, whatever you want to call it. And I think I'm going to show you one more thing. If you want to, at some point in your own time, you can go and have a look at the wedge, the last little component I created, and see how that was done, and have a go at doing that yourself. It's another loft, but have a look at that, perhaps, as extension work in between now and next week. There's one more thing I'm going to show you here, and that is how to split bodies using another function. So at the moment, if I go back to the top level, we can see the hammer handle is sticking out the top of that hammer head. Ideally, we probably want it smoothed off so it's exactly sort of in line with that hammer head, so it's not sticking out like that. Any ideas how we might go about doing that? I haven't shown you this before, so I don't think I have anyway. So,
Can you extrude it down onto the surface?
sorry?
Can you extrude it down onto the surface?
You could, although now we've cut that hole, that surface no longer exists. So you can't really do that. But I know what you're meaning. You could do that in another circumstance. Sorry? Pull? No. We've got a function in Fusion where you can split bodies using other tools. So you can use planes, you can use faces, you can use sketches to cut bodies in the way that you want. So under Modify menu, and this is a really useful function, again, you'll use lots if you haven't used it before, we got the split body function, okay? So if I click on that, it's a bit like the combine cut feature. It asks us, well, what do you want to split? I want to split the hammerhead. What are the splitting tools? Okay, what do you want to cut it with? Now, I'm going to select this surface here and try splitting it like that, see what happens. It's giving me a little preview, quite cool. Extend splitting tools, you can toggle that on and off. Extend splitting tools are if your splitting tool doesn't actually cut all the way through something, you can turn that on or off. Doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter for this example. I'm going to click OK. Looks like nothing has happened. Let me just see if that's worked. There we go, in here, now we've got, that has now been split into two bodies. But because we've used this face as a splitting tool, it's used that geometry to split it exactly in line with that original hammerhead path, or that hammerhead surface. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you remember, when I went back to the original way of lofting that hammerhead in two halves, and we had that geometry line running all the way through it, if I had stuck with that, I wouldn't have been able to use this technique because it would have that geometry line cutting through it, and you can only split with one face at a time. So there was method to the madness of doing it like this, and that just comes from understanding fusion over a period of time. It also is good practice to not have those geometry lines in, as a way you can avoid them. But splitting bodies, and this, Charles, when you were asking me earlier on about splitting bodies ready for 3D printing stuff, you can literally just create an offset plane and split it with an offset plane. You can draw simply a sketch on a plane and use that sketch to drive a split. You can split things with any plane you can select that will split it, that will cut it. And it's a really nice, quick way of just chopping things up. Or
Can you split with bodies to take like bites out of things?
That's
as a boolean.
That's a combined cut.
Oh, yeah, of course it is.
It's exactly what we've just done. Yeah, so it's slightly different. The word boolean is not a phrase that we use in parasolid modelling, but it's a sort of phrase from Blender and T-spline modelling, isn't it? Which I can't, doesn't compute. So combined cuts in that sense. But in terms of splitting things up, split bodies is a really powerful and useful function. You've just got to remember to go and turn off those bodies in the browser. I tend not to delete the bodies because you never know when there's some geometry in that body you've split that you might want for something else. So I tend not to delete them, I tend just to turn them off. And that's our hammer without its wedge. So does anyone want me to go through any element of the whole lofting scenario again? We are going to do more lofting later on, but anything? Obviously everything was crystal clear. Wonderful. Great stuff. Shall we take a 10-minute break before we go on to surface modelling? Stretch your legs.
It can also be useful for things. You could actually scan something if you needed to like fill a certain component. You could actually use the geometry to make a plug or button or fit into something else.
Yep.
They're not really useful for engine parts and things.
Yeah, although scan model or scan geometry is different to parasolid modelling geometry. When you scan something, it creates point cloud data. It picks up lots of points around the scanned object, and then the scan software will join those dots up in a 3D dot to dot and create lots of triangles. And it's a completely different modelling operation to what we do here. So then you have to convert it basically to parasolid modelling, which you can do within Fusion. Okay. It's recently put in some really handy mesh tools where you convert mesh into parasolid models. So long-winded way of saying yes, you can do that. But if it's more for engineering parts, you're probably going to want to actually rebuild a CAD model from scratch rather than use scan data.
Well, it might just be you're working with different materials and you want to make the first bit like the hammerhead first and see how that works.
Yep.
And make one.